where we left off, we were talking about threats to the threats to the Minuteman community, or threats to kind of the lifestyle we're trying to live here. And you want to kind of elaborate on what you mean by that when you're talking about threats?
Yeah, I know one thing that everyone has kind of been looking at recently is the proposed bill to outlaw civilians doing tactical and military training. Um, I know it's not really into effect right now, at least for most of us, but I don't think it's anything that should just be ignored either. Um, I actually have talked to people online that kind of see laws like this in their area that have been passed locally.
Yeah, I think that is one thing to where, we all say, hey, screw it, we're going to do it anyway, kind of stuff, right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of us have this tendency to just ignore it and be like, whatever, it doesn't affect me. But I think the big thing there is that it is something to be concerned about, right? I think that's a good point to bring up because I look at it the same way where looking at like gun laws, right? A lot of people will be like, "Oh, I'm not worried about them passing something new. Like I have what I need." And it's like, "Well, that's great for you, bud, but what about everybody else?" Right? Because the way I look at it is, let's say you and your buddies make the decision that regardless of whether or not it's legal, you're going to continue doing what you do, right? Well, that's a great decision for you and yours. But there might be a bunch of people out there that their heart's in the right place and their head's in the right place, but they're nervous about the legality side of things. So now they don't go out to go do something. They don't go out and train. They don't go do this stuff. And the move, like people, the idea and the idea of being a modern Minuteman kind of slowly fades away over time because you have less and less people doing it because of that worry of legality to where you could have done something to stop it potentially, but you chose not to. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. And let's say if it did pass, like what would people like us do to kind of fight against that or stand up against it? Because they're not gonna fight on your terms and just line up in a field somewhere. They're gonna wait until you're at home asleep and then come crashing in.
Yeah, I think that going back to that OPSEC thing, right? Like, should something like that go through, I think that's where the idea of OPSEC with groups becomes much more important. You know, we were just talking on the last bit about how much stuff we put out on Instagram and things, and like using it as an educational platform and trying to do a reach out platform. I think that it will be interesting to see how this is affected. And it's funny we're talking about this. Actually, I had a conversation last night after we talked with a buddy of mine who he's recently started. He kind of just started as just trying to meet up with other gun guys in the area to do some training stuff,
Hmm.
and it's kind of evolved into like this consistent group that's going out and wanting to train. It's in its infancy, but starting to kind of build that sense of community. And he was asking me for advice. There's a person, for example, that as people grow and more people come to these events, it started out as like, hey, it's just going to be like a public training event. We just want to see who's out here and who's willing to do this. Um, now there's concerns of like, hey, we had this one dude show up and he just kind of like made everybody's hair kind of stick up on the back of his neck, and how should we handle this kind of thing? And I think you're going to run into stuff like that where you might have people who will be a lot more cautious of if they are training after something like this goes through, who they trained
Hmm.
with. I think you might see less people be willing to invite new people in, as well as you know, being smart about what you post. And I think of it this way, like compare it to when the ATF was like, oh, you can't have a brace on your pistols, right? Well, smart people just stopped posting pictures of their braces, right? Like you didn't necessarily have to change anything in the way you live your life. You just had to change necessarily what information you freely gave out. because I think a lot of these things are going to be stuff where you got to be in the right place at the right time. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And if you're continue, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, if you've got stuff like you and I both have on our Instagrams and stuff like that, it's one thing to be like, okay, well, that was dated prior, right? And if you just don't do that moving forward, you're not freely giving out any information that could be used against you. But I think you're right. I don't think it's going to be like, I don't think you're going to be out in the woods with the boys, you know, smoking steel targets, and then 12 guys pop out of the woods. It's going to be like, knock, knock, knock. Hey, is this you? We've got these pictures of you. You're obviously training and doing this. You're under arrest.
Yeah. I mean, look at some parts of the world during COVID where they literally found pictures of people on social media during like a protest and like, hey, you're violating COVID restrictions. Guess where you're going?
Yeah, I mean, I think about like there was that famous case of the pregnant lady in Australia who was basically posted a thing saying like the government's corrupt and can't be doing this, and this is bad, blah blah blah,
Hmm.
and we should organize a protest, and they showed up at her house and arrested her for it.
Hmm.
They're not going to wait for her to start the protest or go down there where she's surrounded by hundreds or thousands of people. They're going to do it when she's at home alone by herself and knock on the door and, hey, this is what's going on and you're coming with us.
You know, you talking about OPSEC and like groups being a little bit more reserved online.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how I kind of got the information about some areas where uh, they have like weird laws about paramilitary groups or militia groups, whatever flavor you want to call it. Um, I stumbled across some because I noticed that they like and comment on a lot of stuff that I post and some of my buddies post. Uh, their profile pictures, like the guys lined up with all their equipment, faces blurred out and everything, but they don't have anything posted on their profile at all. So I was just curious, messaged them like, hey, like, you guys just not post anything or what's going on with that? And they were telling me that, local politics in their area doesn't really agree with what they do, so they can't really post anything. Um, and it's stuff as ridiculous as like shooting at night with night vision or just like wearing body armor out in the woods. Like it's just ridiculous. They didn't want to share with what state that they're in, but I don't think it's a good look at either way.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is it also depends on where you're at, right? And like what the environment and the local idea towards what you're doing is. So like the guy I was talking about with you earlier, in a different state, and the state that he's in doesn't look too fondly on this kind of activity, right? And I don't want to give out too much information on him, but so it's one of those things where it's like, hey, he's in an area that's not super supportive of what he's doing, and so that causes even more concern for him. That's what causes even more concern for him, is that he's in an area where they're not very, they don't have a positive outlook on what he's doing, and that he's concerned that, hey, what if one of these guys is someone in here trying to, cause a problem, or trying to infiltrate the group or something, and we've seen that happen in different areas with different groups. We also saw like the whole Appalachian Rangers situation go down. We've seen time and time again that unfortunately some of the people that are very public about what they do, I like that in the sense that they're trying to build normalcy, and they're trying to um, legitimize what they're doing, and make it seem more normal and more commonplace. So I understand the positive nature of that, but unfortunately, we do tend to see that like bad apples get in there, whether it be people with bad intentions, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be whatever. I mean, look at the guys up in Michigan that they had like the FBI guys try to convince these militia bros to go kidnap the governor.
Oh yeah, and like I think like all but like one or two of them were actually not informants.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's like everyone that was like, being like, yeah, we should do this. They were all informants. All the normal people were like, no, we're not doing that. And so that's the thing is I think like you got to be smart about it, right? You have to know what you're getting into and you have to know your area. Like you can't just have this idea that everyone's on your side all the time. Um, like, regardless of what your personal politics are, it doesn't matter. Whenever you have to know like what your area is like, what they will or will not tolerate, and what you can or can't get away with. And so I think for a lot of us, if that bill does go through, I think most of us are probably still just going to continue to train anyway. Um, Kind of one of those like, come at me, bro.
Hmm.
But be smart about it. Don't be that guy. It's like, again, going back to the brace thing. Don't be the guy that's going to just be like posting a ton of brace content just to get a rise out of something, like just to be like spiteful, and then be surprised if the ATF shows up or something. You know what I mean? Like you have to have some tact and some common sense with this, to where I'm not advocating anything on here. I'm not giving any kind of legal advice. I'm not saying do this, but most things that are illegal when it comes to firearms law would basically go under the radar entirely if people just shut up.
Yeah, if people weren't just flaunting it all the time.
Yeah.
Um, that kind of, there's groups around here, and I won't say any names, but sometimes they're just a little too laid back when it comes to having new people join their organization and then showing what it is that that they got, what kind of fancy toys they have. Um, like that's cool, but like you should keep that under wraps. I mean, I know there are other groups separate from the one I was just describing, where like some people they're not quite exactly on the sorry, I'm having a brain fart here.
No, you're good. No, but I was going to say, while you think about that, this kind of reminds me of that conversation again I was having with my other friend last night, and one of the things we were talking about was kind of that whole vetting process. Like we always say to vet your
Mhm.
people, but we never really say how, right? No one ever really gives advice on how to do that. And one of the things I was thinking about was like every group I've ever been in, as far as like training with people, it tends to be that there's a larger there's a there, let's say there's 10, 15 people, right, showing up with the groups I've been in. Of the 10 to 15 people showing up, there's really only like, in my head, sometimes 5 or 6 dudes that, like, if things were to actually go down, I would actually be comfortable with doing stuff with, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that there's a certain level of like, you have to vet people, and depending on how you do it, I almost think it's like for most people, the way I kind of see this happen with a lot of different groups. And I would say, some are different. Like I know you guys do your own thing, but most of them I see is like kind of a invite everybody to an event, right? Have an open event, get people there, and almost like a talent scout. Like you're almost trying to pick people out, right? It's like a tryout, if you will. And then you kind of find who you like or who you might vibe with, and then over time they earn their place in the inner sanctum. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so that's kind of where what I was thinking about with that was, I think it's hard to vet a lot of people, because on one end, you have the two extremes. One, you just let everybody in, and you got all kinds of people there, willy nilly, whatever. And then on the other side, depending on how tight knit your group is, maybe you have extremely strict criteria. It really just depends. And sometimes there's pros and cons to both, right? The pros of having extremely strict criteria is that you get exactly who you're looking for. The negative side of that, though, is it might be a hot minute before you get somebody new, or you might have small numbers to begin with. Now you might have a tighter, more developed group in that sense, but you might not have a lot of people. Then the pro of the other side of that is you might have a group that you invite a lot of people into and you don't have a very strict vetting process. Well, now you have a lot of people and a lot of different ideas and a lot of different access to resources, but you're not 100% on who you're letting in.
Yeah, and I see a lot of that in this area in particular. Um, Groups that are a lot more selective on letting people in, and those that kind of just like leave the door wide open because reason being for that, I believe, is just like they want as many people to join as possible. Like they really are looking for numbers, and kind of treat it more as like a good old buddies club, or maybe that's not even the right term for it, but just like, yeah, we all like guns here, man. Like just, come hang out
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing too, is that you got to understand that if you're in a group of any type of thing, of any type, like if you're just training with people and you're doing like, Minuteman lifestyle group type of thing, everyone in that group is a representative of your group at all times, right?
Hmm.
Like the whole, like you are who you associate with, right? So if you have low vetting standards and you let in people all over the place, right? Like let's just use a simple one, right? We already know people love to brand Minuteman style people in groups as white supremacists, right?
Hmm.
That's or white nationalists or whatever, right? That's always their first go to. Well, if you let someone in to your group that might actually have racist views, they've now tainted the whole group. There could you might have 50 people and only one dude who's racist, right? Who's like legit racist, right?
Hmm.
Um, but he is going, anytime he opens his mouth, everyone has branded your entire group as that one thing, right? So you got to think of it that way. Like, think of it as almost as if like someone is representing your brand. And what do you want your brand to mean, right? Because that's the message that you're sending out there. So you got to be careful with who you let in and have a shared value system in a certain regard, right? Um, Even something as simple as like, hey, if something were to go down and there's, scenario A, how do we react? You want to make sure you have people of similar values and morals on that, like, so that way you can respond to that. Like a prime example, this question came up at one time in a group where it was like, let's say the world has gone to crap. We have established a secure area, right? Whether it be a camp or whatever. We've got our own little, our own little fort somewhere, right? Our own little slice of pie, our own little Alexandria from The Walking Dead or whatever, right?
Hmm.
And someone walks up to the gate. What do we do? How do we treat this person, right? How do we invite them in? Do we smoke them so they can't tell anybody else where we are? Like what do we do, right? And the wide variety of answers you're going to get with, what happens in that scenario is going to be based a lot on your personal experiences and the morals of your group. And it was kind of a red flag for me at one point where I was in a group like this, and it was like we couldn't come up with what with it. We couldn't come up with an option. You had some guys on the group that were more faith based and leaned into the Christian side of things that were like, hey, let's talk about like, we can't just kill this guy just because he found us or something. Like that's not right. You got to got to play this by the book. And there's other dudes who were like, nope, smoke them. It's a priority to have our OPSEC. And there was like a big morality thing in this
Hmm.
that played a role in there as far as like how would we handle the situation, and some guys trying to be like all grim dark and edgy about it, and other dudes being like, no, like this is a human being, we need to like help rebuild. And there was a very noticeable difference in values and a very noticeable difference in like how to handle certain things and certain matters of morality that became kind of a red flag for me, where I was like, the problem with a group like this is that if we get into a situation where we do have to make a moral decision, we can't agree. Like we're not all on the same page. That's going to cause conflict and issues later down the road.
And that's why vetting your people is so important. Like honestly, you should like sit down and talk with these people from the get-go before you even like allow them into your group for training exercises or the take pictures for Instagram or what have you. But yeah, just talk to these guys for like a couple of hours if you can. Just stay in touch with them. Just like pick their brain about, why it is that you want to be a part of a group like this. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your history. And then like don't just, take people's word for it either. Like do a background check. Like because you don't know if someone is in trouble with the law, and they could even already be a part of your group. Say they're posting stuff that they shouldn't, and like the ATF finds out, they're not exactly just gonna like take that person away. Like, oh, there goes Johnny. I guess he got in trouble. It's like they're gonna offer this guy a deal, right?
Yeah, yeah. Or prime example, I have a different buddy of mine in a different part of the country was meeting up with a group of dudes who were training on the fairly regularly, and like out of nowhere one day, to come to find out, the dude that was kind of like the impromptu leader of the group,
Mm-hmm.
he got arrested. He was a felon. He wasn't even supposed to have guns, and like they were having this whole training thing for months at a time, and he was the one that was doing all the vetting and like allowing people in and kind of running the whole thing, and no one had any idea, that this guy that of his background. And the group wound up reforming afterwards, and kind of like after some scattering and kind of getting back together
Well, that's good.
and reorganizing, which is nice that they were able to salvage something. But a lot of people left, because, and rightfully so, I think, because at a certain point they were like, dude, what the hell? Like this dude who's been in charge of like everything, come to find out he's the bad guy, you know?
Yeah,
And
I can
it
definitely see
causes
that
all kinds of,
being kind of scary for a lot of people.
yeah, it causes some issues, some trust issues and some things like that. And so I think it's one of those things too where, again, the big emphasis for me is like, as long as you're not doing anything illegal, right? And as long as you're not doing anything illegal and you're not using anything illegal or anything like that, I don't think there's anything wrong with inviting people out and doing trainings or things like that or anything like that. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to have a public event, that's totally fine. If you want to do all kinds of stuff, it's totally fine. You're not doing anything illegal. You're not doing anything that would get you thrown in jail for anything. So enjoy your time. But if there is, legislation passed that makes it more difficult to be able to enjoy this type of lifestyle, then my advice is shut up about it. Most things in the world that you get in trouble for are because you didn't shut up about it.
Well, another example we can use is the magazine ban in California. I mean, when they lifted that ban for, I don't know how long it was for, but it wasn't for very long. Everyone started like, hey, it turns out, half the state already had these mags that were banned to begin with.
Right. Or
And
like even in Washington right now. So in Washington,
mhm,
if you want to you cannot buy a magazine over 10 rounds, right?
yes,
But the part of Washington we're close to is right on the Idaho border. There's a Cabela's right on the Idaho border. You know, I know for a fact there are a lot of Washingtonians that are just crossing the border, buying mags and going home. Are they allowed? Are they allowed to do that? Not technically. Is it against the policy? Is it against that state regulation? Yes. Are they doing it anyway? Yes. Are they going to get caught? No. Because who if as long as you just shut up about it, who's going to catch you?
right.
Yeah. And again, like, just for legal purposes, we are not advocating anything. We are not telling you how to live your life. We are not giving you advice. And we are not advocating that you do anything that would be illegal or tell anybody that we told you to do things that are illegal. That being said, it's your own life, make your own decisions. But there's a lot of stuff in life, like speeding, right? You can speed all day long. You got to get caught first, right? So don't be an idiot.
Just
Be
ask
smart with
yourself, what would be the cool thing to do?
Yeah, exactly. How cool would my rap sheet look? But yeah, if I put Florida Man in front of it, would people believe it? Um, but yeah, no, think about, think through stuff, especially with uh, the vetting process. But we're kind of going back to how we started with talking about threats to this community. I think another part of that too, though, is not just legislation side, but also I think honestly, the gun community is its own worst enemy.
I would agree with you there.
And prime example, I've been starting to get into YouTube a little bit as far as putting videos out there, and it's kind of funny to me. Like, I don't get hung up on the comments. I just think like the dichotomy of it is funny. Where on Instagram, I can put out an informational video, and the responses are generally like, "Oh, hey, thanks for this info," or like, positive critiques of like, "Oh, maybe I would change this about the kit or the gear or whatever." And be like, "Oh, that's cool."
Mhm.
Um, Put it on YouTube though, and you get dudes being like, "That's retarded. That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen." Blah 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 blah. And there's a whole lot of like tearing each other down, and instead of building each other up. And it's one of those things where I'm like, it's funny to me that the left, for example, the political left will unite and rally behind any cause, regardless of how diverse it is, and be like, we are all united. We are a hive mind. We are in this together. We can't even agree what effing holster to run. Yeah. Well, some dude runs a holster, and you're like, that holster's gay. You're dumb. I'm not listening to you. you know,
Killed in
and
the
it's
streets.
stuff like that. Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's like, we're always like chewing people apart, and it's like, look, man, 17-year-old in Kenosha has a higher KD ratio than most of us, and he did it with an M&P Sport and a sight mark. Kyle Rittenhouse. And we're sitting here being like, no, your $800 optic's not as cool as my $850 optic. You're gonna die. I had a guy. I was showing off some belt kit, and I said, like, yeah, in my butt pack, I generally keep about 24 to 48 hours worth of uh, emergency supplies, like in my belt kit. Kind of like that's my like supply, like my little supply spot on my belt,
Mhm.
where I'd keep like MRE, life straw, some water purification tablets, shelter making, fire making, like small stuff like that. Kind of just, if I get in a situation where I need stuff, I'm either hungry, hurt, or need water or shelter, I can in fire, I can make it and have it on me. And this dude's like, oh, if you need survival equipment within the first 24 to 48 hours, then you shouldn't even be doing this. You're going to die. And it's like, oh, God forbid I get hungry if I'm out in the woods doing something. Like, God forbid I want a snack.
Right.
It's stuff like that where it's like, um, we are our own worst enemies. We tear, no one tears apart the gun world more than the gun world. And especially like when we get into the Minuteman style community, it's even more so, to where just like even that word community, it's more of I think we just use that because we don't have any other word to use for it that works. We don't really know how else to describe it, but I wouldn't necessarily even say it is a community. Now, granted, some of the people I've met and some of the people I've talked to, and I'm in a group chat with people from 5 or 6 different content creator guys from around the country that we have built a community, we have built like a little bit of a brotherhood and a friendship. And it's really awesome to see that. But on the other side, you got so many of these different groups that have these personality issues with each other, that are just at each other's throats the whole time, or just like anything that this person says, F that guy, you know? And it's all of this personality drama bullshit that's like, a high school episode of Mean Girls with guns, you know? And I think that's almost as big of a threat as any type of legislation or any type of anything else, because if we can't figure out how to work together, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely think at least kind of getting an inside look of like the other side of the political spectrum, like they have a lot less things to argue about than we do. Like, they don't agree on everything, but they're definitely a lot more unified. And I kind of see that as a problem. Um,
I agree. I agree 100%. I think they're way more willing to put aside petty differences or even sometimes major differences as long as they can get together to unite around one issue.
I mean, shoot, dude, like, they could have like a Chicom chest rig and a SKS, and like, they're all gonna be like Yas, Queen, Slay.
Right. I mean that's the thing too, where it's like, hey, everyone thinks like, hey, if there's going to be a civil conflict in the United States, like, oh, all of us ultra chads with our, Knights Armament ARs, we're just going to go smoke all these, libs, no problem. And it's like, yeah, I mean, there might be a little bit of truth to the fact that like the guns and training kind of outweigh one side than the other, but they got numbers, man, and they got no morals.
Well,
They got no,
it
they got
doesn't even
numbers,
have
and
to
they're willing.
be. Sorry.
So see, they got numbers, and they're willing to do some heinous shit.
Yeah, it's not even going to be like left versus right. It could be like you versus whatever state actor is in place. Um,
Yeah,
might not even be the guy
absolutely.
you voted for. You could say, uh, let's say scenario we get invaded by like another country, and they install their own government in your area. Like, how you gonna combat that? Because like,
Right,
you know, hint hint, there's nothing more that they would love um, than for you and your friends to go out in the woods, away from populated areas where they can just do whatever they want.
right. Well, and you think about it too, like, that harsh reality that, let's say it is like a Red Dawn type scenario, and you're the freedom fighter in that Red Dawn scenario. You're a terrorist at that point. That's basically what you are in the eyes of the government that's in charge of that area. You are the bad guy. You are the terrorist, right? Some people, even people who might be, good Americans, especially if there's reprisals for violence or reprisals for any activity that you're conducting, that's how they begin to turn people against you, right? That's where those importance of those community bonds existing prior are a big deal. If you have strong community bonds ahead of time, and um if you have those strong community bonds ahead of time and then stuff goes down, it's a lot easier for people to have a positive outlook on you than, you just became Robin Hood whenever the things went south. And now you're out there, attacking all the bad guys or whatever. Like, think the movie Red Dawn, right?
Hmm.
The Wolverines, they're out there and they start killing Russians. And what do the Russians do? They take a bunch of Americans, have them go out and dig their own graves, line them up and machine gun them, right? Well, that goes one of two ways, right? It either instills deeper hatred of the powers that be and more support for you, or depending on how that support is and how bad the situation is, the opposite end of that, which we've also have historical precedent for, is that we see that people just get tired of, people accept the new reality, people accept the powers that be, and they accept how things are going, and they see you as someone who is threatening their stability.
Yeah, and we have a pretty good current situation going on the other side of the globe that kind of represents that a little bit.
Yeah, I think actually, ironically, I was reading a book called Shock Factor, and it's about sniper teams in the early days of the Iraq War. And one of the things they talked about was when they were in Ramadi, was that in the beginning of the entry into Ramadi, the entire, like, a lot of the city was on the side of the terrorists, right? Was
Hmm.
on the side of the locals. Well, as things continued and as the fighting continued, the connection became that every time one of these, Al Qaeda dudes pops his head up and causes problem with the Americans, life gets harder for us, right? And artillery gets fired, mortars get dropped, planes come by, things explode, our lives get harder, and innocent people die. And it became over time less of an issue with the Americans and more of like a, hey, freedom fighters, can y'all like not? Can you go do that somewhere else? To the point to where the people of Ramadi completely switched allegiance and started capturing these dudes and bringing them into the Americans because they understood like the reality of what was going on. And and it would be a very similar situation in that regard to where you might have people who, depending on where you're at, are still loyal to that. But if things got bad enough and hard enough to the point to where um, I think like in the book 1 Second After, they kind of cover this a little bit, where in the book 1 Second After, it's a post EMP United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
And towards the end of the book, spoilers, the American military starts arriving back into the country from overseas, and they liberate the town where a main character is at, and they're kind of giving them an intel update of what's going on in the rest of the world. And they say, hey, what's up with the West Coast? And he says, well, 6 weeks after the lights went out, so 6 weeks without food, without running water, anything like that. 6 weeks later, the Chinese military shows up with 500,000 troops on the West Coast providing humanitarian aid, and they haven't left. At that point, loyalty to your country didn't mean a whole lot because you're starving, right? People were just loyal to whoever was going to give them food. Well, if you're a dude in that area and you're fighting those Chinese troops, you're threatening the stability of somebody else to feed their family.
Mm-hmm.
Or potentially causing a reprisal. Now, that might turn the local area against you. So it's one of those things where you got to have those hard conversations sometimes, I think, and be like, how far are you really willing to take this? Like everyone talks about, like, oh, ATF shows up at my door and it's like, oh, those plates level 4. And it's like, okay, yeah, but are you like really about that life, or are you just talking a big game? You know what I mean? Like everyone wants to be gangster until it's time to do gangster shit.
Right. No, I think it's something that uh, groups like us really need to look into and kind of like game plan a little bit. Or you can even make an FTX all about that, like how do you take on like a huge standing army that is trying to make itself look good to the public in your area? How do you make them look bad without like directly having a negative effect on the people that you're trying to liberate or protect? It's not easy.
Absolutely. And I think that's the big thing is that a lot of people got to get past this idea of it. I know, let me back up. I know I use a lot of movie references, but I think people got to get past this idea that it's going to be like a movie, that we're all going to be Mel Gibson from The Patriot, and realize that like there's going to be, if we ever have to do this type of stuff, no matter what the scenario, there's going to be some dark shit that's coming, and we have to be like mentally prepared for that. And as hard and as dark of a conversation as that stuff might be, I think there are conversations that are worth having.
Yeah, like not every scenario is going to be you carrying a rifle and sleeping outside.
Exactly. You know, um, and think about like too, like about the roles historically of people behind enemy lines has historically been, right?
Mm,
A lot of times they're way more valuable as intel assets than they are as direct confrontation. Yeah, there's the issue of sabotage, or there's the issue of, taking out the right bad guys at the right time, that kind of thing, and disrupting environments. But throughout history, partisans and resistance movements have been way more vital as an intel gathering asset than they have as anything else. Like think about World War II, right? The French resistance, for example, while causing a lot of mayhem across the country, their most vital aspect was their intel gathering capabilities to feed information to the Allies, right? Leading up into D-Day. That was their most important thing, was like they knew the situation on the ground. They knew the units, they knew who was there, what was there. Like they could feed all of that info to the Allied forces, right?
mhm.
And they could do that without having to fire a shot. You get a guy who works in a cafe who overhears things, and like, he's no commando. He's never done a day of training in his life. All he does is he just listens to people talk when they, and say things they probably shouldn't in public, you know?
Yeah, a lot of
And
them are just everyday people, already at their home, just doing everyday things, but they were paying attention to their surroundings. But thing is, that can also happen like against you. Like there could be
Yes.
informants who are being paid in like food rations or what have you.
Yeah. So that's the thing is I think that you just when it really gets down into it, you got to be careful with what you say and who you say. And OPSEC is just a huge thing, right? I think that's also the importance of building those community relationships ahead of time. Is that you can kind of build those personal bonds that might come in handy later in that regard, to where it's generally harder to feel bad and it's generally harder to justify doing something like betraying somebody if you have a personal connection to them, you know. So if you're building those personal connections ahead of time, you're building advantages in your favor, right? The more bridges you build with different people, the better off you are. There's no negative side to that. Now, yeah, play your cards close to your chest and don't give everything away on the first date, but be smart about it. Be strategic in who your friends are. Be strategic in who you meet and who you tell. Um, I don't tell everybody right off the bat about everything that I do. You know what I mean? Like I don't meet somebody and I'm like, hey, I go do weird stuff in the woods. How are you? You know, those are things that you build into, and I think a part of it too with that is, uh, one, it's to build that relationship first, so they get to know you as a normal person before you try to bring up anything that they might find as weird. But also, you got to nurture that relationship and see if that's somebody you want to bring into that part of your life.
Yeah, and that just kind of goes more into vetting. You got to kind of be able to like read people a little bit and ask the right questions. Um, but all this takes time, right?
Yeah.
Um, One thing I kind of want to go over is the importance of fitness.
Yes.
So, um, this isn't the GWAT. You don't
Yeah.
have fueled vehicles always waiting for you to transport your ass wherever you want to go. You also don't have CAS. Um, so basically, what you're going to be doing a lot of is walking, running, and rucking.
Yes.
At least if you're in that sort of a role.
Absolutely. I think a lot of negative stuff. I think the biggest negative thing for me from the GWAT was this mindset of everyone preparing their kit and weaponry and gear around the GWAT because that's what they knew.
Oh, I know.
And
Just
and,
having
and
everything
exactly
mollied to a plate carrier.
right. And this idea that it's like, you're wrapping your mind around that because that's what you know and that's what you've experienced it, and that's fine in certain circumstances. But the main issue is, you know, for example, great, you have your 7 mags on you because that was your issued combat loadout. When you leave your little area and you go out to go do stuff, you have what you carry. That's it. You know, like you said, there's no CAS, there's no close air support, there's no artillery, to provide you cover. There's no, helicopter coming off and dropping off a resupply or medevacing people. If you're going somewhere, you're probably walking. You're carrying everything you need, and if people get hit, you're dragging them out.
Hmm.
So, I know I'm guilty of this, of not having as good of a physical fitness level as I should, and it's something I'm working on. But that's one thing I think is huge, is that if you want to take this seriously, physical fitness is a big part of that. And it's not hard to get started. Throw your ruck on and go walk around your neighborhood. Go for a walk with a backpack. Start doing stuff to get used to the weight on your shoulders. Go for a run to build up your cardio.
Hmm. And there are better ways of building up cardio than some people may think, Um, like putting on like a 70-pound ruck and just going out isn't exactly the best idea. Just because it's like unnecessary wear and tear on your body. I think having some weight and going the distance is definitely beneficial. One thing to look at is when we were having fun in the sandbox for the last 20 years, is look at how the groups over there, what was it? Not even the Mujahideen,
But the Taliban and
Taliban,
groups
yeah.
like that, yeah.
Like those guys learned real quick that they didn't stand a chance, like in a front-on battle with a military like the United States. So they just did like a lot of guerrilla tactics, right? But
Yes.
those guys had to be like the Energizer Bunny and just like go to road, plant bomb, climb mountain, disappear. Like,
Yeah. The people like to talk about hit and run, but they mainly focus on the hit, not the run.
yeah.
Hit and run involve yeah, it's like yeah, you get to go do the shooting L-shaped ambush stuff, right? But that also means at some point you got to hightail it the hell out of there.
Exactly. Um, and like think about this, uh, imagine your buddies get shot or blown up, and then just how frustrating it would be if you don't even have someone to like shoot at, you know. And that's why IEDs were so successful over there.
Well, right. The whole idea behind the guerrilla warfare is to wear down the morale and basically bleed the enemy out of both their will to fight and their ability to fight. And the idea behind that is that you know especially like the IED thing is huge because like IED thing that makes sense because it's like look if your guy gets blown up and there's no one to retaliate against, that's a big morale issue. It's one thing if there's a guy in the woods who takes a pop shot at you with a rifle and hits your buddy, and then you take him out. There's a little bit of vengeance there.
Hmm.
There's a little bit of feeling better about that. But when there's no one to go back against, or if you're the guy in the woods and you take that pop shot and you hit a guy and then you dip out before they can ever find you, that does things to morale. And that's the biggest part, is tearing down the will to fight, making it not worth it. That's how the whole point of guerrilla warfare. I mean, people want to talk one way or the other about it, but I mean, when it comes down to the American Revolution, it was a long, extremely long, bloody conflict. 1775 to 1783. It was 8 years long, and all it was just bleeding the Brits out long enough to make it not profitable and unfavorable, to just make it to a point to where they just didn't want to do it anymore. It was basically their Vietnam. And they like look again at Vietnam too, right? The idea, just bleed them out long enough and hard enough that they don't want to stay here.
Hmm.
Tear down the will to fight. Make it a daily thing to see dead and dying people on the news.
I mean, history is a really great source for you know, looking at a lot of these lessons learned, um, and not just looking at like how did people like fight each other in the jungle, but like what was going on in the background the whole time. What was the civilian population seeing at that time?
Yeah, yeah, and those are all important factors to consider. I know we all like to get caught up on the sexy bits of this, the gun, the gear, the kit, the hit and run, the CQB, all that jazz, because we all want to feel like commandos and we all like that, whole I'm living my Call of Duty life. But there's so much more that goes into something like that, to where everyone talks about, like with this whole Texas thing, everyone was getting all giddy about Civil War or whatever. And for me, it's one of those things where it's like, one, I don't get giddy about I'm not getting giddy about killing Americans, right? Like that does not get me going in the morning. I think that's the worst case scenario, you know, and I hope that day never comes. But it's one of those things where it's like we all focus on that. We don't focus on the rest of the issue, on historically what does that look like, you know, historically speaking too. Just because a conflict happens, even in your own country, doesn't mean that you're directly involved. You know, there's been a lot of precedents. Heck, even look at Ukraine, right? Yeah, is there fighting in certain areas? Absolutely. Are there people that still got to get up and go to their day job and pay their rent? Yeah.
A lot of
You
people.
know, yeah, yeah. You know, so that's one of those things. Is it's like I think some people almost wish for it as like a reset to be like, sweet, I don't have to worry about paying rent anymore. I can just go off with the Goon Boy Squad and we'll go wreck shit. And it's like,
Mhm.
look, you know, even if conflict started in Texas, we're in Idaho. You know, if conflict starts in Texas, that doesn't mean that I don't have to come to work tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
that doesn't mean my landlord's like, oh yeah, you can just not pay rent. So it's things like that where you still have to consider that, you know. And I think that you shouldn't be, in my personal opinion, you shouldn't be glorifying the opportunity to take place in a civil war. I think most people that are doing that, that are excited for that chance, I don't think a lot of them have seen any type of conflict. And if they have, I'm really curious as to why they feel that way. Because me, it's like, dude, I hope I never get into a position where I have to shoot at fellow Americans. Two, um, I don't want there to be conflict, man. Like, you know, I want to be prepared for it if it happens, but I don't. I hope it never happens. You know, I'll admit it, man. I like being able to come home to my heated house, turn on my TV, have a beer and a burger, and relax. That's pretty nice. That's a really nice thing to be able to do. I would like to be able to continue that, and you know that doesn't happen in this when things like it's like civil war kicks off. When things like that kick off, it gets really bad really quick.
Yeah. One thing I like to point out to some people is look at the war in Ukraine with volunteers during the early parts of it. Um, you know, think of that war as you will, but like I think one thing it kind of might have helped us out with, at least when it comes to like the morality of people, is there were a lot of just gun-toting people that just wanted an excuse to shoot at people and not have to go to jail for it that went over there because they could. You know,
Yeah,
we've seen the Reddit legions uh, leaking their where they're at by posting pictures on Reddit and they get
yeah,
geolocated. But you know,
yeah.
I think it
It
did
is a
a okay job of calling that crowd that just wants to like I can legally shoot a man now and not face any consequences.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things to where, you know, we're all doing this stuff in my eyes because we want to be prepared for should something happen,
Hmm.
right? But that doesn't mean that we should wish for something to happen. And I think that that's the issue. Is I think there's some people out there that have like a fantasy about, you know, I'm gonna be Rick Grimes in The Walking Dead, and you know, and I've got plot armor and main character, you know, and it's like I like the enthusiasm, but you die first.
That's why when I meet new people that are interested in our group, um, one thing I like to talk to them about is faith, and I'll get into why that's important. Um, like I'll ask them about their faith and kind of like uh, the history behind it, like you know, how long have you followed your faith? How new to it are you? Um,
Mm-hmm.
like how important is it to you? And kind of like what are your
What are your beliefs?
yeah. Sorry, I was
Or,
just trying to look for the right words for it. Um, but anyway, why that's important is because you know these people are already taking the first steps to put something else ahead of them. Um,
yes.
and usually they're pretty selfless. Um, and if you share similar religious values among your members in the group, you will have a much tighter bond with those guys.
I agree. I think that it does add a certain level of, um, it adds a certain level to it to where you have things in common that are beyond you, and you have a certain things that are in common that are a certain, just morality issues. You know where you each stand. You have a similar outlook on life, on the afterlife. Um, yeah, I think it's your idea and your basis of morality is the same across the board, and you have similar expectations to hold each other accountable.
Hmm.
And so I think that does play an important role in that. And I think, for some people, that aren't faith based or things like that, I understand where you're coming from. I think that there's still positives with having this conversation when it comes to faith. I know there's some people in this community that don't want anything to do with it, and that's your own prerogative. But I think that it's important to have those conversations to understand where your people are at and where they're coming from.
Hmm. It also just makes things like a lot less surprising about their personality. Like last thing you want is, your buddy gets shot and now you gotta bury him. It's like, well, how do we bury him? And then like the one weird guy's like, I think we should just eat him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, absolutely. It covers a lot of things as far as, also understanding like where you're all coming from as far as having hope and your motivations behind what you do. I think it's really important to do that. Also, from a leadership perspective, if you're in a leadership style role in any of these kinds of groups, it's important to understand what your people believe and where they're coming from in
Hmm.
that aspect, because you can understand what gives them motivation and what gives them hope and keeps them going, and be able to talk to your people and know how to communicate with them about that. Like, that's a very important aspect for a lot of people's lives. So it's an important thing from a leadership perspective, I think, to be involved with that with your guys and understand, hey, where are you coming from? Like, what is your, what's your moral compass based on in that regard?
Yeah, and it's important for leaders in a group to really just like look out for your guys, just like show them that you care. Um, just kind of like talk to them every once in a while, see if they need help, like even outside of training. Um,
Yeah.
because
The
these
best,
guys, sorry,
uh, go ahead. Go ahead.
because like these guys are looking up to you for what whatever may come, the worst situation ever. Um, and they want to know that you got their back.
Yeah. I think that for me, the biggest things for leadership is one, to actually listen to your people, to be a good and active listener, to know where your limits are and to help find people that can make you better,
Hmm.
right? Like, if there's something as a leader that you lack, right? Finding those people who have the thing that you lack or that knowledge that you lack, admitting it, and being comfortable with that, being open and honest with your people, and also, again, taking the time to actually get to know your people on a personal level. The best leaders I've ever had in the military were people that took the time to get to know you. They took the time to know, like, your name, your life, and stuff about your life, and check in on you. Hey, you doing all right? How's it going? They remembered something about you that made it personable, and they genuinely cared, and they put themselves last. That idea of servant leadership, to put others first, and to make sure everyone else is okay. Like, they were the last ones to sit down to eat, and they were the first ones to get up to go.
Hmm.
you know so that kind of stuff, I think, plays a huge role. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of personality issues in this community sometimes, where I think you'll get dudes like, I see it a lot with prior military guys, especially like prior combat arms rates,
Hmm.
where people will be like, you know, what can I learn from you? You're a civilian, and they'll have this idea that like they know everything, so they're not teachable, and they don't want to be teachable, and they just kind of want to, push that bravado around, which doesn't help anybody. And I mean, I can tell you, dude, I did 10 and a half years in the military in the Navy expeditionary community, and I've got a lot of experience and stuff, but there is stuff I learn from people all the time. And some of the best stuff I've been taught has been from people who never stepped foot in the military, and it's like, wow, I never would have thought of that. Like, that's a really awesome thing. And just getting those different perspectives, being open to that is a huge part of this. Like, don't just be that guy who's a closed book, who's like, no, F you, I know what I'm doing, you know? Don't be that guy.
Hmm. Yeah, I get what you're saying, and you see that a lot in the groups where they kind of have like a preference on people. Way I see it is like if you're just willing to show up on your own time on a weekend or what have you, uh, to like not be in your bed at night and sleep in the dirt and like do really exhausting things all day. Um, like I don't care if you're in the military or not, like you're out here.
Yeah, exactly.